Go ahead and get started. Welcome to our information session about the Masters in Supply Chain, Transportation, and Logistics offered by the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Washington. I'm Ann Goodchild. I'm the academic director of the SCTL program, as we call it. The SCTL program is mostly online. We have 10 classes, and one of those is in person, although we do have an online option currently. So it's mostly online, engineering-based, 2-year part-time program designed to transition students to supply chain, transportation, and logistics leadership. All of our students have some experience in supply chain, transportation, or logistics coming into the program, be that as an undergraduate, they've done a supply chain focused degree, or they have work experience, at least 3 years of work experience. So we're taking students who have some experience in the field and really giving them the skills to advance their career, to move into leadership, to move ahead of the tools and methods that they need to make good decisions and to advance professionally. We operate in a cohort model, so that really allows us to take advantage of the online accessibility without sacrificing a community and personal interactions. So cohort model means all the students start together, get to know each other, and then move through each of the courses in that same group. I've often said it's a little bit like many people's experience in grade school, where you kind of had the similar kids in the class as you moved along through the grades. And that allows our program really to build personal relationships, for faculty to know students, for students to know each other, even though we're a largely online program. And we've had great success with that model. We focus exclusively on the transportation and logistics components of supply chain. So there are some programs which are often labeled a Master of Supply Chain Management, which would offer a broader yet less deep experience. So a Master's in Supply Chain might offer courses in contract management, international trade, project management, whereas our program, the Master of Supply Chain, Transportation, and Logistics, offers a focus exclusively on the transportation and logistics aspects of supply chain. We have weekly interactive sessions. So some programs that operate online don't have interactive, people speaking to people sessions each week. Our program does for about 39 of the 52 weeks a year. So there is some time off, but during the academic quarter, we connect weekly. Students talk to each other, students talk to faculty in this kind of Zoom environment. So we have 5, including myself, but 4 other SCTL faculty here to talk a bit about their courses and their why they are involved in the SCTL program today. Apoorv Chen, Dan Stull, Carol Wylie, and Nikhil Suresh. By their name, you can see the course that they teach. So I'm just going to ask each of them to introduce themselves briefly, talk a little bit about their background, and a little bit, we'll save a full explanation of the course that you teach, but a little bit about yourself. So Dan, why don't we start with you?
Okay, hey gang, my name is Dan Stull. I teach the Finance and Performance Management class. I have 2 degrees from the University of Washington, undergraduate in accounting, and then an MBA. And I'm currently studying for my PhD at Cranfield University outside of London. I spent most of my career in business development. I started in accounting. I worked for Ernst & Young and then moved into more business development. I've been involved in a bunch of different companies, the last of which that I sold in 2014 was a large distribution, privately held distribution business.
Thanks, Dan. Carol.
Hi, I'm Carol Wylie, and I have the privilege of being one of the facilitators for the Practicum, which is the final class of the master's program. My background is a bit different. I have an undergraduate degree in business administration, a master's degree in human resources. Have spent time in military settings, was an officer in the Army for some number of years, as well as manufacturing and distribution operations at a truck manufacturer. And then for the last 14, 16 years, I've been working in the nonprofit space, doing logistics and operations management predominantly, but also bringing standards and clarity to fundraising aspects, particularly working with corporations. So my current role is I work for an organization called Vitamin Angels. It's a public health and nutrition organization working with mother-child health for all kinds of nutrition aspects, and have the opportunity there to basically cover a wide range of aspects of business, including supply chain, and helping them with making sure we serve women and children all around the world.
Thanks, Carol. Apurv, I will go with you next.
Yeah. Hi. Hello, everyone. My name is Apoorv Chen. I'm a part of the faculty here at the business school, Foster School of Business, University of Washington. I've been doing operations management for pretty much all of my life, which is early beginning with the work at Unilever. Those were the early days. Then consulting quite a bit. Then I came for my PhD for an operations management at Krannert at Purdue, Krannert School of Management at Purdue University. And then since then, I've been teaching here at the Foster School of Business. I teach process improvement, operations management, inventory management at all levels of the business school. And I've been lucky enough to be associated with this program, teaching inventory management in the winter quarter in this program. So that's what my little background is. I would be happy to explain more of what we do in the course as we go along.
Thanks, Apurv. And Nikhil.
Hey everybody, my name is Nikhil. I am a new faculty for this program. I actually started my course teaching the foundations of data analysis for this current winter quarter. My experience has been, pretty much my entire career has been in the data analytics, business intelligence, and data science spaces. Most recently, I'm working with Meta on their metaverse kind of initiatives. Prior to this, I was leading marketing data science for a logistics startup called Convoy, based out of Seattle. Spent some time in financial services prior to that for about 6 years with Capital One. Did some consulting as well prior to that with PwC, and a French consulting firm called Capgemini. So, but always within the spaces of analytics, business intelligence. I graduated with a master's degree from the University of Cincinnati. And prior to that, I have a background in engineering from India, which is where I'm originally from. But I was born and brought up in the Middle East in Saudi Arabia. So a bit about me.
Thanks, Nikhil. Yeah, I also, I serve as academic director, but I also teach our first course, which we've called the residency. And it serves as, to some extent, an orientation and an introduction to the program. It's one we hold on campus, usually the third week of September every fall. I've been a professor at the University of Washington since 2005. I came to the UW after finishing my PhD at Berkeley in civil and environmental engineering. Prior to that, I worked in consulting also at PwC. There's not that much of a coincidence given that I think they're the world's largest professional services organization. But prior to that, I did a math degree as an undergrad at UC Davis. And I worked at PwC. I got into sort of logistics models, routing and scheduling algorithms for aircraft. That was really where I got kind of inspired by logistics problems and realized that was something I wanted to pursue. So our first question is just, what course do you teach? What motivates you or inspires you to teach this course for the program? And I will comment before we start, we're happy to take questions throughout this 45-minute session. I'd love to answer your questions. any question well, I'll just ignore it if it's a super inappropriate question, but logistics questions, topical questions, questions about our faculty, we'd genuinely love to answer them. So please don't be shy about putting questions in the chat, and we will get to them. Otherwise, we'll start with that first question. So maybe Apoorv, you could start with that one. What do you teach,
Right.
and why?
Yeah, why is an interesting question, definitely. But what is easy, which is that I teach inventory management in the winter quarter, and just a few sentences about what is covered in the course. If you think of, we are all in this business to improve, to do better, which is improving supply chain performance. So, if you want to do that, you have to sort of think a little bit analytically about it, and which is like, okay, what is the supply chain? It's a sequence of inventory locations, maybe connected through roads and shipping lanes and air routes, but it's a sequence of inventory locations. That's what it is. And if you look at it like that, and they may be all over the globe, if you look at it like that, the questions that are of real import, pop up, which is like, what should I stock, and where should I keep it? And most importantly, how much should I keep, right? So those are the kind of things that we build strategies and tools to address. That's the fundamental idea of inventory management. But where do we start? If you think about the starting point, if you want to make any kind of plan, capacity or inventory, you got to say, well, I need to have some ability to peep a little bit into the future. What's my demand going to be, right? That has to be the starting point. So we do forecasting at the beginning, and then we try to build strategies and tools to answer inventory questions, which is like how much, where, what type. And so that's the general idea, that the kind of things that we try to do in the course. Right. Well, why is interesting, but these days, I think the inspiration, motivation question these days is easy to answer, I guess, right? I'm sure last 6 months or 1 year, everybody knows about the toilet papers, but I know somebody was telling me the boba balls in the milk tea are shorted. There's a shortage of boba balls, right? So what are we going to do? I went to a flower and garden show, and they were like, flowers are short. So I'm curious, where are the flowers coming from, right? So I think all of you ran into some kind of shortage or other, and I'm sure that was a little bit of an inspiration and motivation of why should we do all this?
I've been surprised at how, I think as someone who knows how the supply chain works and has more knowledge about how the supply chain works, it's not surprising to me that we have these disruptions. Whereas I think for people that I know that aren't in the field, they're like, this is crazy. How is this happening? And I think, well, you must not really know much about. So yes,
come to the program, come to this course to figure out the answers. That's what it is. Easy to inspire these days.
Great. And yeah, Apoorv has actually been teaching that class since we started the program.
Sure.
We've really been glad to have you on board. Dan, what do you teach, and why is it important?
Okay. Yeah, no, I teach the finance and performance management class. And what I try to get people to focus on is the value that they create within their organization. And the overall value of a company is a function of its cash flow. So to the extent you as a contributor can connect the dots between your activities and how that impacts the cash flow of the business, you're going to be far better off in your career, because that's the way senior executives think. You just simply have to be able to connect those dots. So my course is sort of structured in 3 parts. We start out looking at the nature of cash flow. We talk about process improvements and how we incrementally increase cash flow. And at the end, we talk about strategies of how to pull it all together. In my class, you have to choose a problem in your real job and then put together a performance management system to resolve that, and then give a brief presentation at the end of the quarter. And I'm passionate about the topic because I think people make things too complicated, and I try to just make it simple to think in these terms. And then the second, I really enjoy the relationships with the students. I keep in touch with the students. I talk to alumni all the time, trade emails. I really enjoy that part of teaching, and specifically in this program. Yeah.
So true.
Okay, Nikhil, what do you teach, and or what inspires you to teach that material?
Absolutely. So I teach the foundations of data analysis, and just very briefly, what it essentially tries to cover is we're looking into using database management techniques to understand how companies kind of collect their data, how do they transform their data, how do they load their data into data warehouses, and then beyond that, we kind of look into some practical approaches for how we can, work with this data, extract this data using tools like SQL. So it's a pretty interactive course in that, we have a lot of fun discussions around how we can, come up with a technical approach to working with the data. And lastly, we also are looking into some approaches for visualization so that you can present your data as visual insights to help drive business decisions. So that's what the course is about. As for why, I think at a personal level, I've always been excited about, the opportunity to teach. So when, Anne reached out to me a couple of, maybe last year at this point, I was really excited at the opportunity. My career has been across various industries, with a pure focus on data sciences and analytics. And I have seen firsthand how well you can actually kind of optimize for, your company expenses, how well you can, really forecast your demand and anything across any of these industries, provided the folks have the right amount of skill sets from a technical aspect. And that's really what I want to be able to cover and help people kind of enter into the space. It's a foundations course, so we don't go extremely deep, but we kind of try to cover, as many topics as possible to help people kind of figure out what interests them and help them kind of provide them with extra material on if they wanted to dive into it even further.
Yeah, so maybe, you're kind of touching on the second question, so I'm just going to follow up with that. But that is, why is Foundations of Data Analysis an important class?
Absolutely.
Student?
I think, based on what I've been talking to my students as well, one of the big resounding factors is if you were to look at any kind of job posting today in the market across logistics, supply chain, transportation, any sort of analytics position, at a bare minimum, a lot of them are asking for, some level of expertise around SQL and Tableau, or all of these kind of market techniques. You can see a market rise in demand for some of these skill sets if you were to just look at job postings from 5 years ago to today. So more and more, it's going to be an expected skill set of anyone who's wanting to move into the workforce across these areas. And so that's really why we kind of designed this course with that in mind. And then, more importantly, I think I've seen the power of analytics using these kind of tools across different companies. And, for folks who actually can tap into it successfully, it turns out to provide a lot of impact and improvements to bottom line as well as to the company as a whole. So,
yeah. Yeah, we're responding to that same. So as Nikhil mentioned, this is the first year that we've introduced this data class. And that's, also in response to our advisory board and our alums and those who hire our students, sort of reinforcing the idea that this is really a skill set that students need, but employees need. And I think but they don't need an entire master's degree, right, in data analytics. Well, one could have that, but it's a complementary skill to other skills that our students have. I think we also really designed this course to be accessible to students without a background in data analytics. So is that, maybe you can just comment on how you've approached that with the students?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, we have pretty interactive discussions and, live classes that, occur. And a lot of times students are asking me questions around hey, do you think this would be useful for me to kind of apply for such kind of roles? I think the students have also realized it. They are hopefully finding the class useful for them so far. We are going to be covering some pretty real world kind of examples of data extraction manipulation and presentation, which hopefully would be useful for them as they, in their professional career.
But one of the reasons that Nikhil was our first choice for teaching this class was that I'm not a specialist in sort of data analytics, and we could have a straightforward conversation and I could learn from you. Whereas sometimes I feel like there's a world in that specialization where it's very hard even just to break in and have initial conversations. So I thought you were particularly good at using very normal vocabulary to make sort of accessible some of those concepts. Okay, Carol, yeah, what is it that you teach and what motivates you to teach that?
Yeah, sure. So I have the privilege of teaching the practicum. I'm not sure teaching is the right word. It's really more facilitating. And the practicum is your final class in the program. And what it's doing is it's actually building on the project that Dan spoke of when he was speaking, where he has his students pick a real world problem. In the practicum, you'll be in a team of usually 3, but it could be 2 to 4. And in that team of 3, you pick one of the projects that your team did in Dan's class, and we build on that, and we actually build an entire business case that incorporates all the elements necessary for that particular problem in order to using all of what you've learned in all of your classes. And then you do a presentation at the very end to some of the members of the advisory board and faculty as if we were your senior leaders and you were pitching this idea for funding along with the implementation plan for that project. So it's really cool. The reason I enjoy teaching this is twofold. One, I have a very diverse background of just all kinds of different things. And so and along that journey, I've had the opportunity to listen to a lot of presentations for funding and for project pitches. And some of those were not all you'd hope for them to be. So I love the idea that that I can help teach and train a group of students to really dive in and understand not only how to define a problem, but to take all this knowledge and information that you've now gained and built and craft it into something that you can communicate effectively to others to demonstrate what the problem is, how you're going to solve it, and what you need to get there. And so seeing those presentations and seeing the students go from the first week where we're still working on what's the problem, trying to make sure we have a good problem statement. And sometimes we spend a couple weeks on that just to get it right. And then moving from there to this amazing presentation where our board goes, wow, I'd fund that. That's really great. Is very exciting. We've actually had several of our students come through the practicum doing truly real world projects and actually got funding in their companies from the work that they did on those projects. So it's exciting to see academics become real life in some of the projects that we've done.
Yeah, so as Carol kind of mentioned, one of the cornerstones of the program is this last course, which is the practicum, where we ask students to integrate many of the concepts and tools into a real world application. And yeah, we feel like that's a really important step, especially for people moving into leadership positions. Sort of following instructions and implementing clear tasks is something that you do a lot of as a student, in regular courses. But this course really asks you to structure a problem with your team and to come up with a solution approach as a team. And that's a very different way of thinking, but one that we think is absolutely essential to practice as you move to leadership, where you're the person identifying the problem, you're the person deciding how to address that problem. So it's really fun to see students go through that transition. It's hard work, especially, but yes, we assign an advisor to each of the teams of 3 students, so they do have ample access to support as they go through that. But it's a big celebration at the end of the program when we see those presentations.
I was talking to an alumni a couple of weeks ago who said that course in particular has completely transformed his career, that his company, and he works on projects that impact hundreds of millions of dollars. He said his company has adopted the model that he brought in from the practicum as the new way to approach these big projects. And he said, I wish I would have had that class 10 years earlier.
It's so good to hear that, because we do get, it's challenging. And so sometimes it's uncomfortable for a while, but yeah, it's so good to hear that. Cause I think for those of us that have sort of gone through that, we believe that, but sometimes it's hard work and it feels uncomfortable, the first few times that you're doing it. But yeah, that's really good feedback. So maybe I'll just come back to Dan and Apoorv, just in terms of, Dan, you talked a little bit, I think, about sort of what motivates you or inspires you to teach that course, but because you talked about how you felt like students really needed to understand their value. But did you want to add anything else to sort of why you teach that class and what inspires you?
Well, part of it is because it's the course, if you apply the principles, very practical, and that they are going to help you in your career. And in fact, if you get, as you progress in your career, unless you can sort of think in terms of cash flow and improvements, and there's just going to be a glass ceiling, right? If you just don't understand the core principles of how cash works in a business, you're going to be limited. And the second thing is, because people are working on real world problems in their jobs, it's really interesting for me, being sort of semi-retired and having been through the wars, to watch people wrestle through, the cultural, financial process, selling their projects and coming up with a successful project. We had another student who, the problem she was working on, the company had excessive returns. And as she was very skeptical that she was going to be able to make changes in her business. But as she just kind of applied the principles and went to work, she got the buy-off from the CFO to have access to the materials about how much it really cost. And when she finally was able to scope the problem and presented it to the CFO and the CEO, they were shocked. Everybody recognized that this was a problem in the business, but it was the first time that somebody quantified just how big the project was. And in fact, she followed up with me a year later and said, now the CEO says when somebody walks in the door, or the CFO, they walk in the door with an idea, it's, well, where's your model? Like, they're like, what? How come nobody has presented this to me in the past?
Yeah.
And that's just, it's great fun for me to see people progress like that.
Yeah, we do get a lot of comments from students just about how your course really changes the way they think, which has been in positive ways.
Thanks.
So I wanted to ask about, some ways that you help students engage with the material in your course. And so I'll ask each of you to describe maybe a project or one of the ways that you try to give students an opportunity to engage with and practice the material that you're covering. Maybe Apoorv, we could start with you.
Yeah, so of course, each session or each interaction, we try to make it as interactive, as engaging as possible. So there are typical tools of the trade. But going beyond that, I thought I should perhaps mention a simulation exercise that we do. So it's like, we are trying to lay the foundation. We are trying to build a structure of analytically approaching these things, analyzing things doing better. And then at some point we say, well, okay, now let's experience it to whatever extent we can inside a classroom. So we run a simulation exercise in the classroom where you sort of, be thrown into a fast-paced, make a decision on the fly, you're buying from suppliers and selling to customers, and it's going on week after week after week. And and you're supposed to make decisions in that environment. And so that experience sort of is a little bit of an eye-opener thing. Everybody sort of feels it in their guts, but also feels that as if their eyes are open. And then we sort of come back to our analysis at the end of it and say how all of this can be managed. But that's an experience that's, I think, quite engaging for folks in terms of gaining new insights. So I thought I should mention that perhaps.
Yeah, and I know you really feedback that I get from the students is that you really use the class time not to lecture, that you record most of your lectures and then use the class time for this more interactive material. And they really appreciate that because they can like watch your lecture 4 times if they didn't get it, or pause and, come back later. Yeah. And then do some of that fun stuff like simulation in
that's certainly the plan. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Nikhil, how do you try to help students interact with the material?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the Foundations of Data Analysis course is essentially a technical course. So we try to do live sessions where people are coding on the fly and we're able to kind of ask each other questions as and when you're kind of facing them. And to kind of make it a little bit more interactive towards the latter half of the class, a couple of times I had asked the student for providing some input around like class timings that they would be, available for attending live classes, which, as expected, kind of fit a normal distribution. So what, one of the latter half projects that we're going to be doing is actually move that data into a database and kind of visualize some of that data and slice it and dice it by like, where the people are from and, who voted for what, and then ultimately visualize that on a Tableau dashboard. So it's kind of a real world use case. And it's data that folks are familiar with because they provided the input to it. And, for the initial portion, we're doing live classes where we're coding SQL together. So that's kind of like how we keep it fun and interactive.
That's cool. And they can probably learn a little bit about each other at the same time.
Exactly.
Dan, what do you do to try to help students engage with the material?
Well, my sort of like Apoorv, I don't really lecture. The live sessions are really a discussion of the material, because a part of my job is I try to arm people with the ability to have more intelligent conversations with the finance people in their business. In fact, I say that finance is far too important to be left up to the finance people. My view is the finance people can sometimes really get locked into ways of thinking that are not productive, whereas the people in the supply chain really are operating at a strategic level, because they're the ones that determining, like Apoorv said, how much inventory are we going to buy? Where is it going to be? Well, what has a bigger impact on the finances of business than those types of decisions? So we tend to have an open discussion, because I want to help train people to be ready to have those interactions at work and just be more effective. And then they have to do this project where they do a 6-minute presentation to kind of demonstrate they really get it. So the other way to look at it is there's kind of no place to hide.
I know I've seen the videos that they produce at the end. Many of them are really entertaining. They do a good job of making finance entertaining.
Yes, and some of those get rolled up to the board and get shared within their organization. Some of them are just outstanding.
Yeah. And Carol, I think there's less room for variation in the practicum, but maybe you could talk to how the practicum is run and how you work with students to get that project done.
So we're not introducing a lot of new content necessarily in the practicum, because it's the capstone course. But I think the way that I approach that, I do a lot of asking why. Well, why do you think this? Why do you think that's the problem? Why do you think you want to approach it this way? What else have you learned? What other opportunities might you see? So there's a lot of questions for me, and I really see myself more as a facilitator or mentor type role, even than an instructor or instructor. And I think if I were to put everything that I do and the students I do together in that course, for me, it's asking those why questions to get students to think about what they're presenting and what they're trying to solve, what they're presenting, and what they're trying to get to, what they're trying to sell to their organization in terms of the funding that they need to solve the problem. But then it's also the presentation aspects to help them know how to put that package together to get their executives' attention and actually present it in a way that's meaningful. many of us have the tendency, particularly if we're data oriented, to drive down and we want to present every single thing we have learned in the course of figuring out what the problem is, the discovery of the solution, and the recommendation. And executives have short attention spans. I'll say that because I am one. And if we don't, you've got to, and they don't have a lot of time, right? They want to know what the problem is. They want you to get to the heart of what the solution is, and they want you to tell them what we're going to do about it. And they don't have time to go through all of the data. So we've got to take now all of the great information that Nikhil shares in his course, boil it down to the key things, get that data out of the systems, understand how to present it with our understanding of inventory and finance and all these transportation, all these other things, and present it very quickly, frequently to people who don't know anything at all about supply chain, and make them understand it, embrace it, and appreciate it, and want to fund the solution. Also, you'll frequently find that supply chain solutions are really the answer to problems that don't feel supply chain-ish to people. And so you've got to be able to explain why you think you're going to solve this problem over here with a supply chain solution. You know, and it's a super simple example from my past life. We had issues on manufacturing floor with building parts wrong, high quality scores. As it turned out, it was a data entry problem that was causing that, but it took a lot of definition and review and data to understand and then present what the solution was and why solving a data entry issue would actually solve the quality problem on that particular manufacturing line. So it's but anyway, the bottom line is the capstone has a great opportunity to help people understand how to package all those things together, both the information that you've learned as well as the packaging skills themselves to sell the idea and sell the solution.
Thanks for that. I'll just make another request. If you do have any questions that we can answer for you, please put them in the chat. We'd be happy to address them. Yay, I have a question. So I'm going to try to read that out here. So, hello, nice to meet you. Appears I might not have the background necessary. My bachelor's degree is in mass communications. My master's is in global security concentration. So I'm just gonna say so Carol, you don't usually get involved in this, but we often get applications from, I would say, particularly people who've spent some time in the military saying, I'm not sure I have the experience for this program. And we say, okay, tell me more about your background. And they'll say, oh, I, spent 10 years, doing something quite logistically related. So from my brief little read of your experience, you absolutely have ample qualifications. We can follow up directly, but yeah, it doesn't, when we say supply chain, I guess maybe that sort of implies, for-profit or commercial supply chains. But our students who've come from, and we have probably, I don't know, 10 or 15% of our students pretty regularly have their supply chain or logistics experience from a military application, are very much qualified. Did you want to add to that, Apurv?
Yeah, no, I wish you could get to meet the current or the previous students who have a very similar experience or background. I think none of us here are expecting a sort of a professional supply chain background. All the material is designed, delivered in a way to sort of cater to folks who are coming from outside, from related fields. So I do not, I certainly appreciate the concern, but I really don't think, I wish you could talk to people who are there, and which you will get a chance if you sort of apply.
And as someone with a military background, even though my experience there was in logistics, I actually spent some time prior to that in the air defense artillery units, and I would say that a lot of what I did as an air defense artillery officer actually had a logistics basis to it, even though that wasn't my primary core job. So just based on what you've typed in here, you sound like a fairly senior individual, and that I think you'd find that you have a lot more supply chain experience, particularly from a process and how things work together standpoint, than you probably think you do. Yeah, Dan, did you want to add?
Yeah, we've had great experience with people who've had military backgrounds. I think that they come in trained to think in a particular way, and because the organizations tend to be so heavily involved in logistics, it's just our job to put the finishing touches on it. And again, we've just had great experience, because especially in my class, I think sometimes the military people go, well, I don't really know anything at all about cash flow. It's like, okay, but that's the easy part. You learn how to lead people, and you've been successful in your career, and you move people and material around the world, and let's talk about cash flow. It's okay. So I really enjoy working with the military people who are in the program. We typically have what, 4 every
Yeah. My estimate was 10 to 15%, which is exactly that. Yeah. And quite a number of students who use their experience, use the program as a way to help them make a transition.
Yeah.
So they're building on the skills that they have, or refining some of the skills for new application areas. And we have a number of alums that we'd be happy to put you in touch with who've done that and gone through the program.
The reality is even those that have, say, a transportation background don't always have experience in inventory or in cash flow. So even those with a supply chain background don't have supply chain background in all of the aspects that the program covers. So
yeah, that's a really good point. In fact, I think that's true of almost everybody. So, people who have experience typically have been doing, one job or been working in say procurement, for 3 or 4 years. So they're really good at procurement. But one of the things that the program is able to do is help them see how that function fits into a larger kind of supply chain context. And so, really all of our students have relatively, specialized skills and are maybe good at some parts of the program and really beginners in other areas. And so we're adapted to that. I think one of the things we all try to do is really help kind of use the experience. If there's a student in the class with really deep experience in one particular area, we want to help, for that student to share what they know, and for other students to kind of use them as a resource. So I think that's something that we all try to do with the professional classroom. And I think that helps strengthen the community and helps build connections beyond just sort of teacher and faculty. So I would just want, maybe we can finish just with any examples. I know, Dan, you mentioned at least 1 or 2 so far, but any examples of feedback you've gotten from students or alum that reflect on the impact of the program for them?
Well, yeah, and I sent you an email about this late last week. I was talking with one of the alumni about some of the projects that he's been working on, and he paused. And this guy's the most humble, quiet, normal, nice guy you'd ever want to meet. And he talked about a couple of situations where he was in pretty high level debates about some of these systems that they were working on, and he just paused and he said, I've just found that the program prepared me better. I feel more qualified than some of my peers who went to, and then he went on to list like 3 other well-known supply chain programs in the country. And he just said, I just think I was in a better position to debate my point of view because of this program. And that's a huge compliment. And again, there's so many. Yeah, I had another student alumni who sent me an email last year and said I was in a really heated meeting, and I remembered the 4th week of your class where your point is, and because I always summarize each week with one main takeaway point, and then when that week was let data determine the next steps. She said that just totally changed the direction of the meeting, because she just said, hey, we've got to let the data determine our next steps. So let's step out of the debate and let's look at the data, and maybe that's going to help us reframe the discussion and give us a path forward. And I love hearing stories like it's just great.
It is great. It is super great. So we're gonna sign off here, and thank you for attending, and thank you for your question. We are happy to connect by email and set up a one-on-one conversation. The email is ctl@uw.edu. However, we usually say uw.edu is in the chat, and you can email any questions there. We have our priority application deadline is the 1st of March. So in just a couple weeks, that's like a week away, isn't it? No, almost a couple weeks. And we have, if you apply by that deadline, you'll be considered for our scholarships. We have a final deadline on May 1st, but try to do the March 1st one and you can be considered for some extra financial support. We also have another webinar, and I'm not sure what the date is of that, Katie. We have another webinar about navigating supply chain management through COVID-19 disruption and recovery, where we'll have a number of our faculty who are also experts from their work in this field, talking about the sort of current state of supply chain and what it's going to look like in the next couple of years. So thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate it. And thank you to our faculty for sharing and spending time with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you, everyone.
Take care, gang.